In the summer of 1928, a man by the name of Alfred Loewenstein boarded a small business airplane headed to Belgium from the UK. This was a routine trip for the 51-year-old financier. After all, Alfred was an early adopter of the private jet lifestyle. He was the third richest man in the world and a financial behemoth whose reach and influence spanned the globe. However, the events that transpired on this particular flight would prove to be far from routine. In fact, what exactly happened on that flight is still a matter of intense debate, and the mystery surrounding the incident continues to mystify and fascinates to this very day. This is the story of the man who vanished from an airplane mid-flight, leaving behind a swarm of distraught investors, contradicting witness accounts, and a trail of shady business dealings that only added to the intrigue of this case. Alfred Loewenstein was born on the 11th of March, 1877, in Brussels, Belgium. His father, Bernard Loewenstein, was a German banker who made a large fortune before World War I, but ended up losing it all after the conclusion of the war. A young Alfred was then given the difficult task of paying off the family's substantial debt and restoring its fortunes. While this might appear like a Herculean undertaking to an average individual, Alfred saw it as his ticket to the big time. Like anything he did, he took to this venture with a level of shrewdness and ingenuity that's impossible to fathom. In just a few years, he not only succeeded in getting his family out of financial hardship, but he also managed to carve out an empire of his own. He accomplished this by betting on two nascent industries: electric power and artificial silk. Alfred's wide range of business activities included everything from helping North American companies secure capital from European investors to taking a direct ownership stake in several factories across the continent and turning them into profit-making machines. Needless to say, this netted him a hefty return over the years and helped establish him as one of the most powerful men in finance, feared by many, resented by some, and respected by most. Alfred Loewenstein's fateful journey started on the evening of the 4th of July at Croydon Airport. His airplane, the triple-engine Fokker, was a state-of-the-art machine by the standards of the day. More importantly, the conditions were ideal for flying. The weather was warm and clear, and there was hardly any wind that evening. By all accounts, nothing seemed amiss, and the flight was expected to reach Brussels without any hiccups. 6 other people accompanied him on the trip: Donald Drew, a distinguished pilot; Robert Little, a co-pilot, and a capable navigator and mechanic; Alfred's valet Fred Baxter, the secretary Arthur Hodgson, and the 2 stenographers, Eileen Clark and Paul Biddleon. The plane took off around 6 o'clock, as curious onlookers watched from a distance, not realizing that they're witnessing the prelude to one of the world's most intriguing aviation mysteries. The Fokker triple engine that Alfred Loewenstein owned wasn't an ordinary plane. In fact, it was a flying office that was specifically designed to accommodate his workaholic tendencies. It featured extra soundproofing to block out the loud sounds of the 3 engines, a well-upholstered chair at the front of the cabin, facing backwards, and a glass partition that separates the passenger area from the cockpit. The back of the airplane was separated by a windowless door and consisted of a small compartment that contained a toilet and wash bin. Directly opposite to the toilet was a door that was fitted with a small window. This door served as the sole entrance to the plane and would be at the very center of this mystery. As everyone had expected, the flight was going as smoothly as anticipated. The plane cruised at an altitude of 4,000 feet and settled down to a speed of 110 knots as it crossed the coast. According to those on board, Loewenstein was reading a book throughout the journey. At some point, he got to his feet and headed to the compartment in the back of the cabin. It was assumed that he simply went to the bathroom, so nobody thought anything of it. However, concern began creeping in when Loewenstein failed to return to his seat after more than 10 minutes. Naturally, those on board must have feared that their boss suffered some sort of health issue. Fred Baxter, the valet, decided to alleviate everyone's concerns and went to check up on him. He knocked on the windowless door that separated the 2 compartments twice, but there was no response from the other side. He hesitated for a few seconds before opening the dividing door, expecting to find his employer unconscious or in a disoriented state. However, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The compartment was empty. Alfred Loewenstein had seemingly vanished into thin air. Panic gripped the cabin as those on board tried to make sense of what happened. Hodgson, the secretary, rushed to notify the pilot. By this time, the aircraft was only a few minutes away from the French coast, and the closest airfield was just under 5 minutes flying time away at St. Ingelvert. But for some unexplained reason, the pilot decided to land the Fokker on a nearby beach. Drew, who was an experienced pilot, managed to do so with considerable skill, as the maneuver was far from straightforward. The passengers climbed out and waited for help to come. What they didn't realize was that the beach was under the control of the French military, so it didn't take long before a swarm of soldiers descended on the area, intent on putting the passengers and pilot under arrest. Things would only get more bizarre from now on. The initial interrogation was handled by a certain lieutenant named Marquis. By his account, the process was rather odd and fruitless. The most he could glean from the pilot and the others was that their employer disappeared somewhere over the channel. However, they were hesitant to give any more details that could help the investigation. For instance, it took over half an hour before they divulged his name, and they failed to mention that he was a prominent financier and the third richest man in the world. Inspect Bernat of the Surete didn't fare much better. The pilot and the rest of the party insisted that they had heard nothing, saw nothing, and offered no explanation that could aid the investigators in piecing the case together. No arrests were made, and everyone was allowed to leave the next day. As for the body, a badly decomposed corpse was found floating near the northeast of Cap Gris-Nez, more than 2 weeks after the incident. It was identified as Loewenstein, thanks to the shoes, silk underwear, and socks. Strangely, no further inquiries were made by the French authorities. The most powerful financier in the world has just met one of the strangest ends one could imagine, yet nobody seemed to care. In the absence of a thorough investigation, we're left to ponder a wide range of questions. What exactly happened on that flight? Did Alfred commit suicide by jumping to his death from 4,000 feet? Did he open the exit door by accident, in a state of absent-mindedness? Or was this a case of cold-blooded murder that was orchestrated by those on board? One thing, however, was perfectly clear. The plane's entrance door held the key to unlocking the mystery. The theory that gained immediate traction after the incident was suicide. On the surface, it looked fairly plausible. Perhaps Loewenstein was overburdened by running his financial empire, or maybe one of his deals had turned sour and sent him down a spiral of despair. But a close look at the facts renders this theory quite untenable. First, there was nothing in Alfred Loewenstein's behavior that suggested a suicidal risk. In fact, those who met him that day found him to be very joyous and energetic. Moreover, he had made plans to meet several business associates in the following days, and was still conducting business right until the day of the incident. But most damning of all, there was little evidence to substantiate the claim that one person could have opened the door and exited through it in mid-flight. In fact, contemporary reenactments found the task to be extremely difficult. Not only was the door difficult to open on the ground, but the air pressure made it virtually unmovable mid-flight. In light of this evidence, the accidental fall theory can also be ruled out. Officer George Terrell perfectly summarized this issue in an interview with the Toronto Daily Mail and Empire. Any person wishing to get out of the door, which opens towards the motor, would have to push a piece of woodwork roughly 10 square feet in area against a slipstream of 120 miles an hour, assisted by the backwash of two 150 horsepower motors. The backwash of these alone is enough to knock a man down when standing on the ground. Even if a man could get it open, a super strong man, as soon as the pressure was released, the door would slam shut. His body would be caught and held fast in the closing door. Furthermore, as soon as the outside door was opened the slightest bit, everyone inside would be aware of it. A blast of wind would blow through the cabin. It is impossible, supposing a man did leap from the machine, that the passengers in the inside cabin should not know something had happened. The last part is particularly interesting. Even if we accept that Loewenstein managed the impossible task of opening the door and exiting the plane mid-flight, is it conceivable that no one on board noticed? In a way, Officer Terrell was casting suspicion on the pilot and passengers. Surely, they knew more than what they shared with the authorities on that fateful night. It didn't take long before inquiring minds started questioning the official narrative. The behavior and statements of those on board only added to these suspicions. The most egregious example is the contradictory accounts given by the pilot Drew. First, he made sure to tell anyone who would listen that the door was easy to open. He also testified to that fact before an official inquiry by Belgian authorities. In fact, it is this testimony that helped close the case in Belgium and eliminated the possibility of foul play. Not only did this statement contradict the reenactments that were conducted in the weeks following the incident, but it even contradicts what Drew said in an interview with the London Evening Standard, just 2 days before the inquiry in Brussels. Here is what he had to say when asked if Loewenstein could have opened the door. "I cannot definitely say so. It would need someone very strong to open the entrance door." And this isn't the only suspicious statement that Drew made after the incident. He also gave contradictory accounts of how he reacted when he discovered that his boss was missing. In a first interview with the New York Times on July 5th, he claimed that he looked for somewhere to land the moment he was informed of his disappearance. But later that day, he gave an interview to the Times where he made the following claim: "I immediately changed my course and searched for a time the spot where Captain Loewenstein might have fallen." So, which is it? Did he swing the plane around to look for his boss, or did he land the plane immediately? The disparity between these two statements cannot be overlooked. It's obvious that Drew was scrambling to come up with a story when put on the spot. Sadly, the reporters missed this glaring contradiction and failed to press the issue with him. Once we rule out suicide and accidental death, it's hard to come to any conclusion other than murder. It's clear that at some point over the channel, Loewenstein was forced off the plane and sent to a watery grave. Given the aforementioned contradictory accounts, the fingers of blame were naturally pointed on Donald Drew, the pilot, and Robert Little, the mechanic, with the other passengers being either physically involved or accessories after the fact. As to how the pilot was executed, author William Norris posits that the entrance door was compromised beforehand, making it easy to remove mid-flight. He also believes that the culprits placed an identical second door in the luggage compartment, with the intention of using it as a replacement for the compromised one, once the plane lands. This would also explain the pilot's curious decision to land on a desolate beach, rather than head to the nearby airfield. Since the investigators focused their attention on the entrance door, it's not hard to imagine that such a simple trick could have gone unnoticed. But who was behind this sinister plot? The employees of Loewenstein acting on their own volition is not a theory that could be fully ruled out. However, it seems highly unlikely. There doesn't seem to be a clear motive for murder, and from all available evidence, Alfred paid them generous salaries. It's worth noting that both Little and Drew seem to have lived well above their means in the years following the incident. Did someone reward them handsomely for a job well done? If so, who was it? Who stood to benefit from the death of the third richest man in the world? And did anyone hate Alfred enough to plot his murder? The plot thickens once we take a closer look at Alfred Loewenstein's financial empire. Like most financiers of his day, Loewenstein made a lot of enemies along the way. Between his hostile takeovers of different companies across the world, the ruthless business practices that ruined competitors, and the numerous disputes with associates and board members, there was no dearth of potential enemies that could have wanted him dead. First, there was Henri Dreyfus, an inventor and business magnate from Switzerland. The two men were once partners in the highly profitable British Celanese company. But as it's often the case with Alfred Loewenstein, his overly aggressive tactics led to an ugly falling out. While this might not be enough of a reason to kill someone, it's worth noting that the story didn't end there. A few weeks before Loewenstein's death, an anonymous expose accusing Loewenstein of fraudulent and predatory business practices was published in the Belgian press. Through the efforts of a private detective, Loewenstein discovered that Dreyfus was the author of the expose. He planned to retaliate by filing a criminal libel suit against his rival. Had Dreyfus lost this case, the consequences could have been ruinous for his business. Is it possible that Henri Dreyfus got wind of the lawsuit and decided to act before the suit was filed? Despite his short temper, plotting a murder doesn't seem to fit the character of one of the world's leading inventors. Also, there doesn't seem to be any link between him and Loewenstein's employees. If he was truly behind the murder, it's not clear how and when he could have conceived the plot. Alfred's business rivals weren't the only ones that drew suspicion. While it was not apparent in the days following the incident, it soon became abundantly clear that some of Loewenstein's friends and partners have benefited from his death. As a matter of fact, the value of Loewenstein's main holding company, International Holdings, soared in the weeks following his death. This was in great part due to a $13 million profit that the company reported during that period. While the financial statements don't specify the source of this significant windfall, William Norris discovered that the amount matches a number of insurance policies that were taken out before the incident. These include life insurance policies that cover both murder and suicide, as well as policies that protect the holder from a depreciation in internal holdings value. Needless to say, the timing and nature of these policies is peculiar to say the least. While the holder of these insurance policies has never been identified, the most likely individuals are Loewenstein's partners in International Holdings, Albert Pam and Frederick Sarvasi. It's evident that both men made quite the profit as the result of Alfred's death. Norris also noted that the two have snapped up a fair amount of newly issued shares at bottom basement prices right after Loewenstein's death and just before the announcement of the $13 million windfall. Insider trading laws weren't in place back then, so Pam and Sarvasi were able to maximize their profit at the expense of the average unsuspecting investor with complete impunity. Short-term gain wasn't the only motive to get rid of Loewenstein. The financier was notoriously difficult to work with, and while Pam and Sarvasi owed a great deal of their success to him, it's possible that they started to see him as a ticking time bomb that could blow up in their faces at any moment. His extreme risk-taking and confrontational approach to business were an antithesis to their conservative nature. Could they have turned to murder in order to protect their business interests from a partner that was slowly becoming a liability? It's entirely plausible, but in absence of hard evidence, this is nothing more than mere speculating. The more conspiracy-inclined people of the world have entertained another theory. Could Loewenstein have faked his own death to start a new life? As far-fledged as this theory sounds, there is some circumstantial evidence that supports it. After all, the badly decomposed body was unrecognizable, and it wouldn't have been that difficult to plant an unidentified corpse in the channel. There are also some pressing questions concerning the way the family handled the burial. Why did Loewenstein's family bury him in an unmarked grave? And why didn't his wife attend the funeral? Can this apathy be attributed to them knowing that the body was a decoy? If we accept the fake death theory, then Drew's decision to land on the beach takes another twist. Did Loewenstein walk out of the plane upon landing and fled in an awaiting vehicle? Was he behind the insurance policies that seemed to perfectly hedge against the events of that day? This mystery is as frustrating as it is perplexing. The conspirators, if there are any, have taken their secret to the grave. The eyewitnesses have long been dead, and the lack of a thorough official investigation have left us with very few leads. It's safe to assume that we will never get a definitive answer as to what happened on that summer day in 1928.